Hi, it's in progress. I'm Rebecca Tree, and I have been walking alongside children, young children, and the adults who care for them for nearly 40 years. My path through early childhood education has never been a straight line. It's been a long, spiraling apprenticeship with mentors who invited me to look beyond the mainstream and toward more holistic human ways of being with children. I often tell people that my journey has not been typical. I founded and directed a nonprofit early learning program for more than 25 years, and in 2014, it it layered along with me stepping into higher education at Southern Oregon University. So once I got my master's, I continued teaching in the classroom, but I also began teaching coursework at the university, along with mentoring and creating workshops for educators who are hungry for depth, integrity, and alignment in the work that we do. So, over the decades, and many of you who have been doing the work for a while have seen this, I've watched our field shift. Even the words that once held meaning have been reshaped by political agendas, commercial interests, and a readiness culture that treats children as a race. And that's why I now speak about developmentally appropriate alignment rather than just practice. Alignment asks us to return to theory, to developmental truth, and to the children's lived experiences. Practice, as it's often used today, has been hollowed out. It has disconnected from the principles that once grounded our work. So my website and YouTube channel hold more of my very unapologetic positions on early learning. And I share them not to provoke, but to invite us to consider where children's thinking grows, sometimes quietly, other times with boisterous excitement, but always richly and often unnoticed. And if you want, there's a packet on the website. There's a reflection sheet that can be used for each of the sections, a resource page with the readings and references, many of which I used in this presentation, and a summary. I will provide a heads up for each section in the event that you would want to pause and take notes and possibly use the reflection sheet to come back to it later if you wish. But one of the reasons why I'm using KWL is it's not that it's a baddie, but it's familiar. Many of us have used KWL charts at some point or similar tools because they're very tidy, they're structured, and on the surface, they look organized. And the KWL is what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned. It's a form of documentation, a form of charting children's responses. When I refer to KWL, again, I'm also referring to similar tools that have been developed to be used with young children. These tools are not the root problem. Simply, they show us a deeper shift in early childhood education, a shift in pace, a shift in expectations, a shift away from the culture of childhood and toward adult-driven structures that prioritize efficiency over depth. And so I want to lay a question gently on the table. What if this approach does not holistically capture children's deeper meaning? Again, there's something different and bigger that's been happening in our field. It's a shift towards adult-designed tools that have replaced more engaging methods of being with children. When we place a linear tool on top of nonlinear thinkers, something gets lost. As we move forward, I'm going to invite you to look with me at children's curiosity, how it unfolds, how it meanders all over the place, and how it may loop back on itself. Several years ago, when I was in the classroom at the program that I founded, my staff and I were documenting what was going on with the kids on our playground as the weather started getting cold in Southern Oregon. The children became fascinated with ice. Anything with a little bit of water, even though we empty it and dump it out, kids have water radar, and they found these sheets of ice. They were touching it, they were breaking it, they were carrying it around like little treasures. And because at the time I was completing my master's, I used a similar approach to the KDL, but with the staff to explore possibilities around this interest. Now, the project lasted about 6 weeks, and then it naturally began to wane a little bit as the weather shifted. And I eventually had to post the final project, even though the children's inquiry might have continued on its own rhythm, which is great. But it was a beautiful project, and it revealed a few things that were really, really important. One, the process was about helping the adults to consider possibilities. We used it to get our own juices flowing, to capture children's ideas as they happened, and to create invitations that expanded what was already unfolding. And there is also a PowerPoint with that process. It's the PowerPoint that I did way back of showing this process with the kids and what they were doing and how they were discovering things and some of the conversations that they were having with us and showing us, and then what we ultimately used and did to extend it. So in this presentation, we're going to slow down and look at what's underneath of that shift. This series is organized into 5 sections: slowing down, the developmental mismatch, moving beyond KWL charts, a simple observation framework, which includes observing, do not interrupt, document, and extend, and then the closing, which is the understory. And again, if you want to pause at any place and take a breath and return to it, then with that heads up with the charts and with telling you when our next section is coming up, that may be helpful. So with this grounding, I want to widen the lens. Let's look at the cultural forces shaping our day, the pace, the pressure, and the readiness mindset that so often pulls us away from children's actual thinking. So as we move from section to section, I want to offer a question to tuck into your pocket. How am I helping children discover their own strengths, interests, and ways of knowing without replacing them with my own or someone else's? So now we're at section B, slowing down, the heart of the issue. So as we consider the cultural shift, we are basically rushing children, not because we think it's good for them, but because the values around us have shifted into a constant state of getting kids ready. We've drifted away from the importance of the lived experiences of each child. Ready for kindergarten, ready for reading, ready for the next benchmark. And in that rush, we move through our days at a pace that almost guarantees overlooking important information children are offering us. The readiness mindset has changed childhood, and it has quietly reshaped who we have become. It has reshaped how we plan, how we observe, how we talk to children, and even how we feel about ourselves as educators. We're asked to move ever more quickly, produce evidence, check boxes, show progress, even when the children in front of us are needing something entirely different. There is a couple of good books that I've read, and no, I just want to show these to you. They're also listed in the references. This one is called Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child, Time for Slow Pedagogies in Early Childhood Education by Allison Clark. Really good. You can see all the little tabs sticking out. And then the next one is Honoring the Moment in Young Children's Lives, Observation, Documentation, and Reflection by Ron Grady, Red Leaf Press, another really good book. So just to show you those. So the educator identity lens is something I want to talk about a little bit. This pressure that I described places upon us, without really even saying it out loud, a hold of power over children. We're directing their thinking, organizing their ideas for them, steering their play towards outcomes, managing their curiosity so it fits within a timeline. But a slower pedagogy, slowing down, invites us into something entirely different: power with and for children. Walking beside them, protecting their awe and wonder, honoring their pace, and helping their ideas take shape without replacing them with our own. When we slow down, our engagement becomes more relational, more human, more effective. And if we look at Vygotsky, who talks about the social context of learning, that all learning happens within a social, relational format. Rushing is not neutral. It imprints itself on the day, reducing it to tasks instead of human moments that give it shape. When the schedule takes charge, interruptions register as disruptions, and that small relational opportunity that matters most is crowded out by the demand to keep pace. It quietly reshapes how we see children and how we understand our own role. One of the first concerns is the image of children in childhood. When we rush, we stop seeing children as whole beings. We start seeing them as compartmentalized, as collections of skills to be checked off. Children become a training ground instead of a lived experience within its own culture. And this begs the question, what do we think about children? How do we think about children and childhood? The second concern is how rushing distorts our interactions. We begin filtering children's responses, listening for right answers instead of their deeper meaning, the thought within the thinking. We direct instead of pausing and wondering with them. We prioritize completion over connection. The next one is the efficiency trap. Since about the 80s and 90s, as the readiness push intensified, we've seen worksheets, isolated skill instruction, expectations meant for older children that are pushed downward. The system has quietly shifted developmental timelines by 1 to 2 years. We've already had this discussions years ago about kindergarten becoming the new first grade and the new second grade. Well, the developmental timelines shifted. Younger children are judged against older expectations, older children. And when they don't meet them, we risk labeling typical development as deficiency. And this downward shift in expectations isn't just something we feel, it's documented. The National Association of State Boards of Education, the NASBE, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, highlights this misalignment in its work on pre-K to kindergarten transitions. And that information, again, is in the references. So the teachable moment, that's kind of a double-edged sword. The idea behind the teachable moment can be traced back to early theorists like Rousseau and Pestalozzi, Froebel, and later Dewey, all of whom emphasized observing children's natural readiness and responding to their developing inquiries. And although the practice of seizing spontaneous learning opportunities is centuries old, the term teachable moment became woven into early childhood practice between the 1970s and 1990s. At about the same time, the developmental theories, such as developmentally appropriate practices, developmental and cultural appropriate practices, and the movement towards child-initiated, inquiry-driven learning began rising. So we continue to be reminded that curriculum is not just planned itself, but also discovered in the living moment-to-moment thinking of children. The teachable moment sounds responsive, but under pressure, it can morph into something else. It can shift away from the child's agenda. It can turn relational moments into instructional ones. It can become subtle control of form of power over. It can miss the actual need in the moment. It can lead us to talk too much, filling the space children need for their own thinking. And it's in these moments that children's thinking becomes something to capture rather than something to accompany and walk alongside of. There was an experience of a child who was deeply focused on pouring water into the sandbox and watching it absorb. And then the adult who was observing said, I see you use the red bucket. Do you see anything else that is the color red? So it's moments like this that show us how easily adult agendas can slip ahead of children's thinking or totally hijack it. We may consider some wording changes such as learnable moment rather than teachable moment, which emphasizes honoring children's various learning modes and asks us to be a skilled observer and respond to children's interests and their natural curiosity. So from here, let's consider in our own experience, how do moments like these become spaces of mutual learning, especially when both the adult and the child are able to relinquish traditional roles and stay open to learning from one another? And here's a developmental truth. Young children think in layers. Their ideas emerge slowly, symbolically, sometimes very rapidly, emotionally, and non-linearly. They think in pockets, not in categories. A piece here, a metaphor there, a fragment of a story tucked inside play. These layers, we can't pull them back at warp speed. It takes time. It unfolds over time. And only when the adult is not rushing or peppering the child with questions, rather listening and watching. As one of my adult students said recently, it's finding the why of the way. And this is especially important in helping parents understand why children's stories and ideas reveal themselves in fragments, like a little piece here and a little piece there. So the idea of slowing down is not indulgent. It's developmental alignment. It's not about being soft. It's not optional. It is a developmental alignment. And when we slow down, we stop forcing children's ideas into adult categories. We stop rushing toward outcomes. We start listening for the idea behind the idea. So take a little bit of a breath. Take your eyes off the screen for a moment if you need to. Allow for the brain to focus on something else. It's a lot to take in. Jot down some ideas if you want. You can pause right here if you like. Then I want to offer these reflections. What might shift in our classrooms if we slowed down just 10%? What might a child reveal if we weren't in such a hurry? What might they discover if we gave them time to think, feel, and wonder? As a reminder, the speed with which children process information varies. Language development varies. Executive function varies. Many young children, often boys, need longer pauses in conversations. So if we're asking a question, some children need more time to process that before they can formulate their response. Because remember, language is still developing. And we are in such a rush to get an answer. We need to pause. I have paused sometimes as long as 45 seconds, giving space and time for the child to process their ideas and then share them. Again, the reflection question, how am I helping children discover their own strengths, interests, and ways of knowing without replacing them with my own or someone else's? We're moving to section C, the developmental mismatch. This is why KWL charts and similar tools miss the mark. Again, it talks about the research that I did talked about adult pacing and child development colliding. while KWL charts can be useful with older elementary students and adults, very young children, it creates a developmental mismatch. It assumes some things. Young children do not naturally organize their thinking into what I know, what I want to know, or what I learned. That structure and categorizing belongs to much older children and adults. When we use it with children, young children, we're often organizing our thinking, not theirs. Thinking about your thinking, that kind of self-reflection, that is metacognition. So using these tools as intended, the child needs to be able to notice what's happening in their mind, choose a strategy to move forward, reflect on what worked and what didn't. These are complex cognitive skills, and young children are just beginning to develop them. They need time, space, and more lived experiences. And of course, the whole developmental continuum till they reach the age of 7 or 8, and you start seeing that developmental shift. So when we ask for tidy, categorized answers, two things often happen. One, we confuse the child because the task is developmentally way out of reach. We may say things like, oh, you mean right? And then we write it down because the child can't think fast enough or respond fast enough in order to respond to us. Even if we ask, did you mean no, the same thing applies. And I'm guilty of this. I thought it was a great idea. Many of these tools are designed for efficiency, but they're not grounded in how young children actually construct meaning. This doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they're being used out of context with where young children are. Tools are meant to serve us, not us serve the tools. So now we want to lean primarily on, this compels us, we want to lean primarily on our own knowledge of human development and child development. We want to rely on the close observation that does not prioritize deficits, what the child cannot yet do. We want to rely on and lean on our professional intuition. We should choose what truly serves young children. I'm not saying tools are bad. That's not what I'm saying, but they need to be developed and used in context to how we can serve the child. The challenge and with KWL and similar tools is while it looks efficient, they can unintentionally narrow what counts as learning. I once listened to a webinar by a professor out of Harvard who said that too often we measure what doesn't matter, and what doesn't matter can too often not be measured. The goal becomes capturing content rather than understanding the complexity of child's thinking. And let's face it, our work is busy. We get overwhelmed, we're exhausted, and when we reach for a tool that promises efficiency and measurability, we hope that it will be doing exactly that. But this has opened a massive market for educational helps. Profitable, very polished, and often developmentally misaligned. And they are making a ton of money. So we've touched on that children's thinking is not disorganized. It's actually clever. Their logic is different. The meaning making is woven into their lived experiences, led by fantasy and imagination. Remember, these early years are full of fantasy, sprinkled with curiosity and real questions. So, for example, if we were to ask a young child, what do you know about rain? Which is a what do you know question, we might hear, rain is sad. Emotion. My grandma's dog got wet. Lived experience. I jumped in puddles once and my mom got really mad. Ooh, experience. My brother said puddles are portals for frogs. What's a portal? Much older brother. It doesn't fit neatly into a chart designed to capture for short factual statements. Those kinds of responses are beautiful and poetic, and we should be capturing them because they demonstrate how a child's reasoning shifts from here to there. So their ideas erupt, their thinking is alive, it is constantly evolving. In fact, their fantasy, when they watch television, they think that those characters are real. I remember listening to back in the days when there were records, I would lift the needle up and put it in different places on the record because I thought there were people sitting somewhere singing into a microphone. They just know where that needle was going to fall. That fantasy thinking. So their ideas evolve and are influenced by what other people say, what they might notice, a sound, a memory, a feeling, a story that we're reading, a movie that they've seen, or it's just simply in the moment that they're in. And what we know when we're looking at the developmental landscape, that between ages of 2 and 7, most of their thinking is symbolic, it's intuitive, it's very imaginative, and it's full of leaps. From 7 to 11, it becomes more logical and more concrete. From 11 to 12, they're thinking very abstractly, and it begins to really morph into ideas that a 2 or a 7-year-old may speak through symbols, but not be able to speak in language that is now taken shape. So as we remember this, we can better understand and accommodate the thinking patterns of young children. We have to understand that their thinking does not align with ours, and we should not attempt to try and rewire their brains. More importantly, their ideas are not just verbal. Remember, language develops over years. It starts with gestures and sound, the baby's babbling and fingers. Then they can name things, bird, nose, eyes. Then there's symbolic language, which refers to the way that young children can use an object to stand for something else, and more to more abstract meaning. And in their drawings and in their gestures, their objects, their stories, their play scenarios, all of these things express their thinking long before they can explain this in the adult world and using adult words. This is complex. Children need time, they need space, they need real hands-on experiences to strengthen and clarify their own ideas. Large blocks of uninterrupted time to allow them to move, to express ideas with their bodies, use facial expressions, to test theories such as, if I dig this hole, will the water keep absorbing into the sand? Their scribbles and their drawings, and they need time to adjust their thinking and try new ideas without us interfering. Take a breath, stay with me. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. I've used KWL with really young children. I always treat my classroom as a lab to explore ideas, and I remember feeling very unsettled about this. The children seemed disconnected. I found myself trying to redirect them and keep them on task and on topic. And instead of listening to their stories and reasoning, I was actually shaping their responses. Without realizing it, I was positioning both them and myself to search for the right answer instead of exploring possibilities together, regardless of how fantasy-laden they were. Sheer poetry. So I had to step back and ask myself a really couple hard questions. Who is this really for? Is this about me or is it about the child? So I had to reframe some things, but like many educators, I first encountered KWL in a required literacy course when I was getting my degree. It made sense for older learners, so I thought, oh, well, why not? But there's this disconnect that happens in our field. Many early childhood courses are often grouped with the older grades without really naming any of the developmental differences. So I found myself in some classrooms with ed students that were going to be teaching like third grade and above. Fortunately, some states, including Oregon, are beginning to correct this. The creation of the Department of Early Learning and Care in 2023 in Oregon is one example of early childhood being recognized as its own field with its own developmental truths. And as a result, Southern Oregon University split, it's still under the education umbrella, but now early learning has its own pathway, and ED, the education, K through 12, has its pathway. Now, they do merge periodically when necessary because some students may minor in early learning, and so they'll take multiple classes that kind of blend all of this together. So tools like KWL come from a genuine desire to support children and make learning visible. Many of us, me included, have used them with the best of intentions. And it's not about being right or wrong. It's just about timing and noticing and choosing what aligns with young children's development. So what else? If KWL isn't meeting children's needs, what does? But again, I want to voice the reflection question. How am I helping children discover their own strengths, interests, and ways of knowing without replacing them with my own or someone else's? And now we're to section D, moving beyond KWL charts. It's a more holistic way to understand children's thinking. So what do? So I like to look at things that I consider to be organic, child-led inquiry. We've already explored that kids' thinking is not like adults and doesn't fit into tidy adult-made categories. When we impose on children these types of tools, we can flatten or redirect their authentic meaning making. So what children do offer is rich, their language, their gestures, their metaphors, all the things we've talked about, their playthings. Those require adults to be able to peel back the layers with our own curiosity, not templates. That doesn't mean that I haven't made some of my own, but it's usually in regards to how I can articulate their learning to others, such as a story, the learning stories. I don't know if you're familiar with learning stories, but I did learning stories for a long time because it communicated to the adults what the children were undergoing as they were engaged in their various activities. And during the ICE project, which I mentioned earlier, the process assisted the adults as we organized what was emerging. It helped us as we observed and listened and made decisions about the materials and the sequence when to introduce different ideas. And it was what children were talking about and what they were showing us with their movement and with their hands. Noticing is the first one. What works better? Noticing. Noticing means observing what is present, the here and now, rather than focusing on what is missing or not yet. When we're not careful, our internal questions drift toward what is the child not doing? What skill is behind? How does this compare to a standard? Like, what box do I put it in? What behavior needs fixing? These questions have their place when we have legitimate concerns. But when those types of questions become our default lens, we reduce children to just isolated skills. Now, when we look at the whole child approach, a more holistic approach, and many of you are familiar with this, what is the child doing? What is the child doing? What are they curious about? What strategies are they using? How are they communicating? What am I bringing to this moment? Checking in with my assumptions, my biases, my expectations. The focus is on what we see and what we hear, and context matters. We need to understand relationships between children and other children, between children and grown-ups. How is the environment set up in that moment? Are you inside or are you outside? Where is everything placed? The culture, the child's family story. What emotional state is that kiddo in right now? Along with the physical space, all shape not only what we see, but how children interact within that space. It's about the stuff and the people. Noticing allows us to tell the child's story. Again, not the story we think others want to hear or what might be on the checklist or what we feel we might need to report. Noticing invites us to look for the 100 languages, regio. Children what do they use to communicate? Again, coming back to the gesture, the movement of the body, their sounds, the cooing, the mimicking, what they're drawing, how they're playing, the proximity, where they are in space with one another, their facial expressions. These are subtle nuances that many times we miss. When we slow down and notice, we see more skills. We see thinking, we see curiosity, we see their effort, we see evolving thinkers, we notice competence and persistence, risk-taking, and the ways that children rise to challenges. Many of these sound very similar to habits of mind. Many programs are starting to replace some of their other tools with habits of mind because it captures children's thinking. And there's different categories of habits of mind, including one specific to early learning. My own noticing shifted when I began to be with children during their investigations, not as an intruder or a question asker, but as an observer and the stage manager, where I offered materials when I felt some of those materials might extend what they're doing. If they asked for something, I took notes. Children need to see us writing, not I photographed the process, not portraits where children will stand there and go, no. I want them to hold it in a way where they're showing the work. And I'm also careful of where I'm standing. I'm careful of my proximity. So I didn't interrupt their flow or their thinking zone. And that took practice. When children say, look, teacher, they're inviting us to look, not evaluate. And I talk more about this in a YouTube video called Stop Saying Good Job, and a little bit later when I'm closing out this session. Listening is essential, not enough. Again, look at their hands. Watch where their hands go. Sometimes the hands are reaching and then the eyes follow. Sometimes the eyes lead where the hands will go. Look at how the interactions include others or don't include others. We are not therapists. So when we're looking at their drawings and other things, we are not there to do therapy. We are developmental observers, ensuring that our practices align with the children's needs and stages. When it comes to drawing and pictures, if you look at Rhoda Kellogg's work, she has left us a legacy of examples and stages of what children move through, from the very basic scribble to more humanoid shapes, and it's fascinating work. When we are developmental observers, we can honor the child's developmental stage. We honor their symbolic language. We honor the emotional truth and the child's stories. We also honor the child's right to construct knowledge through play and dialogue. And what do these conversations sound like? So instead of saying, what do you know about butterflies, which is a very, it would be a KWL style prompt. We might say, tell me more ideas. What made you wonder about that? Show me with your hands. Sometimes kids don't have the language. So if I'm lost in the conversation, I'm trying to gather understanding, I might say, show me, take me where I need to be so that you can tell me more. You said the caterpillar was homesick. Can you tell me more about that? What do you think might happen next? Make certain These are genuine and linked to the here and now. They're not just memorized phrases that we rely on over and over again. So look for prompts, create prompts that slow us down. Keep the child in the driver's seat. Allow symbolic meaning to surface. That takes a little bit of time because remember, they're processing. Reveal misconceptions without shaming. I recommend that you do not correct misconceptions. Early childhood is full of misconceptions, misunderstandings, and misinformation. Unless these things are harmful, it doesn't need to be corrected in that moment. Remember, children are in fantasy much of the time. We need to help children sort through these using their thinking with the conversations and idea sharing at appropriate times. If it's something that does need to be addressed, then your crew needs to get together and say, how can we do this without shaming? How can we do this? Because apparently it's an important thing. Otherwise, lead with materials. Lead with a story. Talk about it at your gathering / circle times. Hey, I noticed you guys had these ideas about da 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 da. Tell us more about that. What else do you need to explore this more? Write that stuff down. Build trust and relational safety. Honor the child's emotional truth. Children don't need to memorize the body parts of butterflies. They don't. They might, but they really delight in the words like proboscis. And they'll know what a proboscis is because if you're hatching butterflies, you can point that out and it's fascinating. But don't rely on that as a checklist. It's just fascinating. And children delight in this as much as they enjoy saying magenta. It's my daughter's favorite word when she was growing up because it's magenta, Mom. She loved saying it. I would say it's pink. She said, no, it's magenta. They love saying California. Grandma and Grandpa live in California. They love saying dinosaurs. Their joy is in the experience. So our role as early learning specialists, this is where we shine. This is where adults become interpreters of children's symbolic language, co-thinkers who follow the child's idea threads, meaning makers who help children make sense of their encounters, bridge builders, building shared understanding between others and their experiences. Young children do not have shared understanding. And I believe in the YouTube language of negotiation, I talk about shared understanding in a social context. But they don't have shared understanding. So they rely on us to help build the bridge so they get there. But they may not get there while they're still with us. There still might be a few years out from really getting whatever it was. The work is not to fill in the chart. The work is to uncover the child's internal logic, their theories, their fears, their hopes, their metaphors, all the connections that they're making. So what do we learn from this approach? Not by this approach, but from this approach. We discover their actual misconceptions, which are developmentally normal. The emotional layer between the idea, their prior lived experiences. We really need to pay more attention to lived experiences. I've read some studies where there are observations being done in classrooms and the curriculum agenda overpowered a story that a child was trying to tell a teacher, which was related to what the teacher was trying to bring forth. However, because it was from the home, it was disregarded. So we have to pay attention to their lived experiences, their culture, and their family lens. We also need to pay attention and discover the child's intuitive theories about how the world works. This is information that no KWL chart or a similar tool can capture. So I'm now going to return back to our guiding question. How am I helping children discover their own strengths, interests, and ways of knowing without replacing them with my own or someone else's? So now that we've looked at all of this, I want to go to the simple framework. Do not interrupt, observe, document, extend. And we're going to start, because this is the heart of the work. We're going to actually start with observe. We want to slow the adult body so the child's thinking can rise. So we need to observe without urgency. Notice the pauses the child engages in, their gestures, the pacing and the persistence, the emotional tone, symbolic language, and schema patterns. The schema patterns provides a language and a deeper insight into children's play patterns. If you're unfamiliar with schema, look at schema in early child education and you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff. I've been using schema as a way of observing to widen the lens of domains, which are still somewhat narrow, but schema adds more to that so that it opens up that window much broader. Notice their hesitations, the repetitions, the metaphors, the way a child's body leans toward an idea. These are the places where thinking lives. When we stop mining for deficits or checklist items, we begin to see the child's actual mind at work. Observe the in-between spaces, the moments where details disappear when we rush, when we interject, or we overlay our own interpretations. Observation is not surveillance. It's about being in the presence of the development of human greatness and knowing enough to stay humble in its presence. The next one is don't interrupt. Protect the child's cognitive flow. This is hard. This requires listening more and talking less. Some of our past trainings may have emphasized the opposite, like the teachable moment that we talked about earlier. Imagine that you're trying to crank out a newsletter or a paper. You're at the computer. You're completely in this thinking zone. The thoughts are coming rapidly. You're trying to keep up on the keyboard. And the thoughts, ideas are coming. Then somebody walks in and they peer over your shoulder. And then, what are you doing? Can you tell me about your work? Does it have a name? Are you certain that this is a strong enough sentence? Can you let me, I'll show you another way. It's imperative that we avoid interrupting unless there's true potential harm. Let the silence do some of the work. Avoid rushing to correct or redirect. Practice, practice, practice. A child deep in thought is not waiting for the adult to validate the moment. They're inhabiting an interior world, what we often call flow in holistic education. Their little murmurs and their whole half-spoken phrases are not invitations to join them. External speech, because they talk outside of themselves, is not a conversation starter. It's the brain sorting, sequencing, and making sense of experience. This is where I am watching what they're doing, what they're looking at, their pauses, because maybe they're thinking, I need something else. And I might push a few things closer because remember, children still sometimes have little blinders. They just see what's right here. And sometimes if I scoot something a little closer, all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's within their field of vision. They go, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Stay close enough to witness, but far enough away to protect the fragile architecture of their concentration. Your presence is felt even when your voice is quiet. When they are ready to re-enter the social world, they will signal it. I watched a boy from across the room paint at the paint easel. He did a line down the middle, horizontally and vertically, and then each quadrant he filled and repeated. So there was a circle, and then a circle within a circle, and then dots, and then some other things, but each quadrant held the same symmetry. When he was so deeply focused, and I was way in the back of the camera photographing it with, a lens because I didn't want to interrupt. And then when he came out of that zone. He looked around and he saw me in the back smiling. And he said, "Look, teacher." And that was my cue. That is when I walked forward and we had a conversation. Look, teacher is the bridge, an offering, not a request for approval, praise, or evaluation. And it is a doorway into authentic engagement and certainly not the moment to say good job. That phrase belongs to the adult's need, not the child's growth. Look at Alfie Cohn's work. It's really good on this. So when the child signals readiness, you could say, "I've been watching," and that's exactly what I said to him. "I noticed how you mixed the colors, how you stacked the blocks, stapled the pieces, ran so fast." In this case, I said, "I saw you made those lines down the middle, this way and that way. And then I watched you make the circle." And I had watched, and he was like, "Yeah." And he's adding so much more. "How did you do this? What was the first thing you did? Then what happened? Do you need anything else?" Because I asked him at some point, I said, "Did you want to put more ideas on here or are you done?" I would never have thought of that idea. I say that when I know that it's true. And most of the time it is. "Can you tell me da da da?" Or as a social thing, if Susan's standing this, "Can you tell Susan about this? I see her really looking at your work." These questions honor the child's thinking without hijacking it. Then the documenting. Documentation is an unfolding process about the struggle, the strategy, the return to the idea. Write what is happening, not what you hoped would happen or why you think it is happening. Create an objective, factual, neutral account of what you actually saw or heard without any interruption. You're not interrupting. No judgment, no assumption or adult meaning layered on top. If you're using schema, if you're using Rhoda Kellogg or some other pieces, you can pull from that to help your analyzing and to give language to it. Tell the child's story as it reveals itself, not the version you think others are expecting. That's not authentic. Document what you actually see or heard. What happened? What did the child do, say, the gesture, the attempt, what did they repeat if they did? What materials were used? Did you offer any other materials? What sequence unfolded? First they did this, and then I saw them did this, and then this. And I had the photograph that, supported what I was documenting. What it can sound like on paper when you're doing this, Jamal stacked 6 blocks. He paused, then added a 7th. Ava whispered, "It's tipping," while adjusting the base. 2 children carried a log across the yard. He returned to the puzzle 3 times in 10 minutes, which is why sometimes we don't want to sweep things away too soon. And why this matters is objective observation protects the child's actual thinking. It keeps the adult from projecting, assuming, or diagnosing. Unless you're a psychologist or something of that nature, we have to be careful of sounding like we're diagnosing. It is the foundation of ethical documentation. Documentation becomes the compass for curriculum. It guides future provisioning and helps us see what will move children's inquiry further. This is not about cute. It's about witnessing the architecture of human thought. Curriculum is there to serve us, just like these tools. We are not here to serve the curriculum. And again, schema theory helps us read these moments to see patterns, understand internal logic, and it guides the provisions that we can choose next to support their interest. If you're not familiar with schema theory, it is a way to observe, name, and articulate children's play patterns. And I have found working with parents regarding schema and giving them information of how they can recognize it in their own home has been valuable, because all too often some of children's play patterns are seen as naughty instead of urges and patterns in order for the brain to have access to more information. We don't want them running out in front of a freight train, really, we don't. But in that trajectory, what can we provide that would satisfy that urge and give the brain that needed information? And then we extend. We're being responsive, not redirective. Extend only when the child's inquiry signals readiness. A new material, a different color, a fresh tool. These are invitations, not redirections. Perhaps a child wants a different color at the easel. Give it to them. Don't get hung up on, we're only using autumn colors this week. I had a child who wanted blue paint, and we had chosen autumn colors, and it was great. I gave him the blue paint. He immediately took off his shirt and proceeded to paint his arms, his stomach, his neck, and he even asked a peer to paint his back because he couldn't reach it. Now, when I showed the mother the pictures of the process, we had to wash it off because it was drying, it was getting itchy. She laughed, thank goodness, and then explained that his dad had taken his older brother and him to see Avatar. Extension should widen the child's path, not reroute it or hijack it. So you want to make good notes for later provisions. Sometimes I just have lines drawing all over the place, sticky notes all over the place. When I say all over the place, I mean I have this one little area and I would just stick all that stuff. So the environment will evolve with the children, not ahead of them. It will evolve with them, not ahead of them. Leave space for future ideas. So if you have a, I say, you can say, I want to put out this and this and this tomorrow. That's great. But have another list of future possibilities. I don't call it curriculum planning anymore. I call it planning for possibilities. And remember, children's interests bounce and they shift. Deeply engaged one day, indifferent the next. This is the nature of their thinking, and it's nothing personal. I have had to sweep away really what I thought was very cool activities because there was no interest. But then I had to step back and was it just the wrong day? Was there already other things of higher interest that were out? Could I revisit it in a different way if it really feels that important? Was it too simple? Was it too complex? What do I need to do? Or don't worry about it. So this does not mean we cannot set out a provocation to gently nudge interest. Sometimes something extraordinary happens and that becomes the curriculum. So we once had a swarm of bees gather in one of our trees on the playground, and this changed the whole day. We learned that when a colony becomes too large, the old queen leaves with thousands of worker bees to find a new home. They cluster on a branch while scouts search for a new location. One of the staff went in, I'm going to Google this. And that's what we came up with. It was like, cool. The bees are harmless during that time, but the moment provoked so many questions and so much. I could not have written this if my life had depended on it. We called a beekeeper, but the bees left before he got there. But a few days later, we discovered that some grandparents were beekeepers. And they visited the classroom with all of this stuff. And it was the coolest thing ever. That's curriculum. And it requires and begs us to be flexible. When we live within this framework, with integrity, something beautiful happens. We begin to see childhood with new eyes. So again, the guiding question, how am I helping children discover their own strengths, interests, and ways of knowing without replacing them with my own or someone else's? And now we come to the closing. This is what I call the understory. Rachel Carson once wrote, if a child is to keep alive their inborn sense of wonder, they need the companionship of at least one adult who can share it. And this is our work, not to direct, not to hurry, not to shape their thinking into our image, but to share in their wonder without overtaking it. Children live in the understory. Let me explain. Their ideas don't always rise in straight sun-seeking lines. Their ideas unfold in the shaded places where curiosity grows quietly, in fragments, in metaphors, in gestures, in play. Children don't need charts to think. They need adults who listen deeply. Children forage for understanding. They gather bits of experience and information the way a forest creature gathers food, circling back, picking up what was left behind, following a scent of possibility. Their thinking is not linear. It is exploratory, recursive, it's alive. Slowing down is how we protect children's interior world. That quiet place where ideas form before they are ready to be spoken. When we rush to sort, to label, or chart their thinking, we remain on the forest floor. Very tidy, very visible, very predictable. When we slow down and listen between the surface, we begin to notice the tender new growth of their theories, the quiet logic of their wondering, the beginnings of meaning taking shape. Our work is not to pull their thinking into the open before it's ready. Our work is to walk with them through the understory, noticing, interpreting, and honoring the life that grows there. Anne Palo reminds us to be present is to be astonished. Astonishment is a natural posture of an educator who has slowed down enough to truly see. So now again, I return to the question that has been threaded through this entire conversation. How am I helping children discover their own strengths, interests, and ways of knowing without replacing them with my own or someone else's? If we can hold that question close, gently, consistently, humbly, that we are already reshaping early childhood education from the inside out. Because I don't think change is going to come from the outside in. Not with charts, not with checklists, but with presence, with curiosity, and a deep respect for the culture of childhood. When we slow down enough to walk with children through the understory, we discover that their way of knowing is already enough and always worth following. Thank you so much. Visit the website. There's stuff waiting for you.